To do chapter 3 of my story, my book. This is Father, part 1. There'll be some more about my mom from the last chapter, but as it gets weaved into my story coming up. If you missed any and don't know what the world I'm talking about, you can go back and watch my previous videos where I'm telling my story, my testimony. Last week I talked about my mother and the complicated relationship with that. And this week I'm going to talk about my dad. I'm going to get started here in just a second. And once again, I'm reading it so I can kind of stay on track. I don't want to go off in a rabbit hole too much. So please bear with me. Okay. So, chapter 3. My father's parents divorced when he was just a baby. He and his mother lived with her parents. His father remarried and was living in a different state. He was in the Air Force. And then his father died when he was only 7. He was raised by his maternal grandparents in a Christian home. He grew up angry and a little rebellious. He never quite got over watching his mother die. He was apparently a ladies' man. He looked like Elvis, supposedly. A lot of people think that. He kind of tried to dress that way sometimes with his hair slicked back and stuff like that. But anyway, his grandparents ran a truck stop and cafe for a few years. And so my father, he worked at a service station down the road. He was pretty young to be a manager, but that's what he was doing. And he met my mother. She would come bring him food from the cafe. I mentioned that in the last chapter. When I was born, my father was 20 and my mother was 19. So my great-grandparents lived right next door to my parents and me. There was one piece of land and we all lived on there. My great-grandfather, he could not stand to hear me cry. He would go over there and pick me up and look after me. They say that I was the apple of his eye. My dad told me that I was very attached to him as well. When I was 6 months old, he died. He was killed in a vehicle accident when a drunk driver ran him off the road. The truck rolled over and he was killed. My father started out being a really good dad. I remember him teaching me to eat an apple. That's kind of an odd memory. I think I was like 3 or 4, probably about as far back as I can remember. But he would play board games with us. He taught me how to play chess. He took us on family vacations every year to the same place. That was really fun. It started with his grandparents, and they started the tradition, and so he carried it on with us, and I have continued it with my family. He really liked going there. It was a state park near a beach, so we would camp out in a tent. For people who have RVs, don't be offended, but if you don't camp out in a tent, you're not really camping. That's the way I looked at it. But as I've gotten older, I guess it's a little less fun. But anyway, there was a lot of good memories there. My uncles would go with us, both my mom's brothers and my dad's side of the family. His actual aunt and uncle, but he was raised up like their brother. So anyway, sometimes their kids would go. There was a trip sometimes that they would just random up and go. And I wouldn't get to go because they wouldn't tell me. I'd be at a different house, so they would just go without me. They didn't care if I wanted to go or not. But anyway, when my brother and I were little, my dad would take us to church. I don't know exactly what age we stopped going, but at some point we stopped going to church. My dad was he had his idea on what a father should be, and he was trying really hard to be that. I do remember him reading us the Bible and talking about what it says. He was trying hard to do what he thought, like I said, a father should do. And honestly, for most of my life, the thing I feared the most was to disappoint my dad. That was just the biggest fear. Him being disappointed would have hurt worse than anything else, it seemed like. But he worked a lot of hours. He worked hard. And I admired my dad. I had a lot of admiration for him up to a point. So my mother worked, but I'm not sure she helped pay too many of the bills. She kind of kept her money to herself. I'm not saying she didn't do any, but my parents would argue and fight about those things. Dad and her would argue a lot, but he would defend me. When my mom would say things to me or be a little mean to me like she was, then he would defend me, and they'd end up fighting. Sometimes I wonder if she was mean to me so she could pick a fight. I don't know. He stopped going to church, and then his views on faith started to change. He got a little warped in his thinking. At one point, he had said that there was no God. I think maybe he was just angry with God. He expected God to keep the family together, and that didn't happen. There was a dark side to my dad. That anger came out. He would beat my brother and I with a belt. He felt we deserved it. Down here, it's called a whooping. But, I have nothing against parents disciplining their children, but there is a such thing as going too far. And I think my dad went a little too far on most occasions. It would leave black and blue marks on us, red marks. Sometimes we would end up bleeding. He would just beat us in a circle as we danced around. There was one time I got hit in the face with a belt buckle, and it punctured my cheek, and I had a scar there for quite a few years. So there were times when he would also get carried away with my grandmother, his grandmother, great-grandma. We call her Granny, so if I say Granny, that's what I'm talking about. She would step in and say, "That's enough, quit." So when there wasn't a belt, they would use a peach or plum tree switch. This whooping would surely cause some bleeding for my brother and me. He would spank both of us, or whip both of us. He said it was to make sure he got the right one. So it didn't matter who was guilty and who wasn't. We both got it. One day, when everything changed, my father had decided to put himself first. He'd had enough with what was going on with mom and her cheating and having boyfriends, so he went and found himself a girlfriend. He bragged to me once about how he brought her home and told my mother that he was going to be messing around with this woman and he wasn't going to sneak around about it. So, at this time, my mother was pregnant with my sister. So, I was around 12. Yeah, 12. And then I turned 13 right before my sister was born. He said that putting himself first was the only thing that he could do. So during this time, that's when I started feeling really alone. My dad used to stick up for me, and now he wasn't around anymore. The new girlfriend even called the house to talk to Dad, and I answered the phone, and she bragged to him how she was going to marry my daddy, whether I liked it or not. Not sure that was appropriate for her to do, talking to a 12-year-old, but hey. I could understand Dad wanting out of his marriage, but that was going about it the wrong way. Anyway, I can understand, yeah. To my parents, cheating was somehow normal. It's like they were just trying to hurt each other and get even, one-up each other. It was all about getting even, and I was alone in my struggles with my mother. Dad was not around and had no clue what was going on at home. He didn't seem to care either. My brother had it pretty rough too at this time, although he had a way of getting out of his chores at home. We were casualties in their war. My brother, who was about age 10, he would go to a little country store right up from where we live, and he would earn some money sweeping floors and stuff like that. I think the lady at the store took a liking to my brother, and that was her way of looking out for him. She was an Italian lady. She was very nice, but anyway, I digress. They bought my godparents, which I'm going to talk about in the next chapter. They would buy my school clothes and things like that, but my dad would not even give me $2 for lunch money at this point. And that's $2 for a whole week. Anyway, my godparents were my safe place. And my dad's relationship with this other woman didn't work out eventually. And he dated some other women, actually. So, my mother finally left. She was seeing this man. She finally left and went and moved in with him. And they finally got divorced. Now, I was like 2 months from graduating high school when this took place. And as I mentioned, my sister was about 5 years old at that time. So, there was about that 5-year window where they were just cheating on each other and trying to hurt each other, and instead of just getting a divorce. I guess they were waiting for my brother and I to be grown. I don't know. My dad would be bringing women home all the time. I never knew. I'd come home and never know if there was a woman in the house or not. My dad became a huge control freak. He stopped doing anything that a dad would do. I wound up becoming like the wife of the house. I'm not saying that in a gross way, but I had to do all the chores. Sweep, clean, iron his suits, polish his shoes, things like that. He would say mean things to me that didn't used to say, but he would tell me I needed to lose weight, or I needed to do this, or I needed to do that. It's like my entire self-worth as a human being was dependent on whether or not I could find a husband. So, at this time, like I said, from the time I was 13 to 18, so I wasn't really looking for a husband at that time. My self-esteem was pretty much in the toilet between both my parents. My dad did not buy my first car, yet he tried to take it away from me. He demanded that I go to college, but he wasn't helping pay for it at all. I paid for it myself. I did start college, and I was using the savings account that was started for me by my godparents, not my parents. Like I said, that'll be in the next chapter. I did have a full-time job, and I was working full-time. So, there was a lot of high pressure during this time, and I was having anxiety attacks. I was trying to go to school, take care of my sister after school. I was working. I was also coping with an emotional trauma in my life at the time. I was date raped, but I'm not going to talk about that. So just know that I was going through dealing with that at the same time as my parents' divorce, taking care of my sister, trying to start school, and my dad's constant pressure on me to do things. He just wanted to, I guess his control over me was a way of trying to steer me in the right direction, but he did a lousy job of steering his own life. I fought against him because I didn't feel like he was doing the right things. I felt like I had let God down based off on what happened to me. And I had felt like not only did I let God down, but I was no longer worthy of love from God or anybody else. I went through a very dark period during this time. I didn't care if I lived or died. I even prayed to God to let me die. And I mentioned something about that in my previous chapter about how, I had contemplated how to, do that to myself. And I couldn't understand why God didn't leave me dead. And I prayed that He would let me do that. So, I was just really dark. I wasn't going to church or anything during this time either. I was verbally, physically abused, emotionally and mentally abused, and abuse, of course. So, as I mentioned before, I sat in my bedroom floor with a knife and contemplated. But I considered myself chicken because I was afraid it would hurt and have physical pain. So, all I could do was sit there and cry and pray. And I kept hearing God's voice in my head saying, the Lord doesn't want you to do this. So I cried and prayed. I kept hearing that voice. I know God has a purpose for me. And doing that to myself was not part of the plan. I kept a journal. And during this time, that journal was a huge lifesaver. It's something about putting words to paper that helps feel better. It gets all that emotion out, and then I could go back and read it and look at it from an outside perspective, kind of like, well, what if my friend had wrote this? You know, what would I say to my friend? So I was kind of my own guidance counselor, I guess you could say. I cried, I prayed, and I wrote. So God in that journal saved my life. At a time when I needed a better car, the car that I had was having to be fixed all the time. It let me down on the way to school and back a couple of times. I ended up having to drop one of my night school classes because of my car. And I asked my dad to help me. He said no, he couldn't help me. And of course, he was wrapped up in his life and dealing with his own issues. One of my uncles had a car. His wife wanted a different vehicle, so he was going to let me take over the payments on that car. And that's what I did. I took some money out of my savings account. I thought they were going to finance the car in my name, but they didn't do that. They just took my money and financed it back in my uncle's name. It wasn't the best deal. I got to it, basically. But it was the only option I had at that time. My dad blasted my uncle, threatened to sue him and all this other stuff because he helped me. I felt very unloved by my parents, and my uncle and his wife were very helpful during that time. My dad would spend hours lecturing me on what I should do and how I should live my life. It got to be a lot of heavy weight. I started spending a lot of time at my uncle's house. This is the one that's 10 years older than me, my mom's brother. I would watch his kids after school. I'd come to his house after school and watch his 2 children while they got home from work. His wife became a very good friend to me during that time. She and I spent a lot of time together, and we enjoyed spending time together. She bought me my prom dress for my senior year. When my uncle would go hunting and fishing, I was hanging out with his wife. I would also spend time playing with my little cousins. They were the same ages as my sister, so my mother became quite jealous, actually, of that time I was spending with my uncle's wife. She didn't like it, but she didn't do anything to spend time with me her own self. It was at my uncle's house that my mom was there one day that's the day I blasted her, when I was roughly around 19 years old. I just let her have it. Like I said in my last chapter, one day I had a nervous breakdown. That's what I call it. I was in my floor once again in the fetal position, thinking about doing things to myself. My dad was standing over me. His loud, demanding verbal voice. Basically, if he couldn't make me do what he wanted me to do, he was going to pound it in me one way or the other. Anyway, my mother actually came to the house that day and stopped him. Told him to leave me alone, which is interesting. Anyway, at that point, I had decided I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped out of school. There was a friend that wanted to move to a city up north of us, about an hour away. She wanted to move and get an apartment and all that. So I said, hey, let's go for it. So we went up there, found us an apartment and a job. So I had quit my job and quit school and moved. I used what was left of my savings for a security deposit. And moving was the best thing I ever did. I felt free. I felt happy. I started going back to church again. I gave my life, back to God and realized that, He hadn't abandoned me. And so I got rebaptized. I know that it didn't necessarily mean anything more than the first time, but at this point, I pretty much told my dad to get out of my life. I was doing great. I was working. I had my own place. Well, one day, my roommate decided she was going to move out. I can't remember the details of it, but she got married. So I got a new roommate, and she did not pay her the bills. We were supposed to split the bills, and she didn't pay it. She ended up moving her boyfriend into the apartment, and he didn't pay anything either. So I ended up having to cut my phone off because the bill was so high. Back then, you had to pay by the minute on your phone bill, okay? It ain't like it is now where you can call anywhere. In those days, there was no area calling, as we call it. My rent check, I hurried up and paid my rent, wrote a check with the landlord, and when she got off work, she was supposed to give me the money and put it in my bank, and that way the check wouldn't bounce. Well, she didn't give me the money, and my rent check bounced. So that made it look worse. We had a huge fight. She ended up moving out, and I got evicted. They kept my security deposit. So I had to find somewhere to move to. My dad's aunt, I stayed for her a month or two until I could get my job transferred back to my hometown. Once my transfer was approved, I moved in with my mother and her new family. And the manager that I was working for didn't want to give me more than 10 hours a week to work because she didn't like the idea that the store manager actually approved my transfer. She didn't like it. So she took it out on me, and I couldn't get enough hours. So I wound up getting a second job. At this time, my father was remarried. He married a woman who was very bipolar. And she had a daughter, my stepsister. She hated me. Oh, she hated me. I bent over backwards to try to get along with this girl. No matter what I did, it just didn't work. I tried to pay her way. My brother and I used to like to sing karaoke together. And I paid her way to get in. And, I just really went out of my way to try to get along with this girl, and I couldn't. My dad took her side and everything over me, so her best friend started dating my brother at this time, and so I started hanging out with her, and this made the stepsister jealous. She told me I stole her best friend. We were working at the same place at that time also, so we would ride to work together and come home together. But my stepsister was really jealous of my relationship with my brother as well. She was an only child, so, and my stepsister was also a teenage mom. She had a child and wasn't married, and I guess she was barely 19, 20. She ended up dating, my dad tried to fix me up with this older man, and I said no. So my stepsister ended up dating him. So, that was a little weird. I came home from work one day to find out that my family, my mom and her family, had packed up all their stuff and they were moving out. When I walked through the door, the house was bare. They were moving and didn't bother to tell me they were moving out. And I guess I wasn't invited to move along with them. So I had no choice but to call my dad and say, hey, can I come stay with you? And my crazy new stepmom. She thought I would have to pay, back up. My stepmother thought that I should have to pay rent. Although her daughter did not have to pay rent, and neither did my brother who was living there also. But I was almost never home. I had 2 jobs. I would eat at work, and so I didn't, other than come home and go to sleep, that's about all I did there. But anyway, I moved back in with my dad and his new wife. And my dad's marriage was not quite great anyway. It was a roller coaster up and down. They would break up, get back together, break up, get back together. My dad would move, she would move out back to her original home. He would move out and then move back. So stepmom blamed my brother and I for their issues. So in order, my dad eventually, she moved back to her place before they got married and just stayed. And my dad moved in with her. And I said in order to not be homeless, I asked my dad if I could just take over all the bills. And this was my childhood home. So I started paying the payments and electric bill and all that. So I assumed all the debt so that I could live have a place to live. So I was living on my own with 2 jobs, and every time him and his wife would get in a fight, he would move back in with me for a little while and then go back to her. So Dad finally divorced her and got a new place to live. I had to go bail my dad out of jail once. His wife had him arrested for harassment. She moved home, he moved with her, paid all her bills. They went out to dinner, was supposedly working it out, and she had him arrested. I had to go bail him out. Yeah, that was hilarious. But anyway, my dad moved right next door on the family property. So there were 3 mobile homes on the same piece of property. There was my granny, myself, and then my brother moved in with me as well. And then Dad had his place. There's one advantage to that. At the time my dad got his own place next door, my younger sister actually could move in with him and live with one of her parents instead of our granny. But my dad was back in the position of being able to control my life because he was right next door. He would walk right into my home. I mean, technically, I guess it was his, so he didn't feel like he needed to knock on the door or nothing. He would just walk right on in. And my sister was still having visitations with my mother at this time, so her life normalized a little bit. My mother suggested that I get a job at the sewing factory where she worked. They needed some people, and so I went, interviewed for the job. They had this little dexterity test you have to do to work in a sewing factory. I passed that, so I got the job. That meant I could work 1 job and pay all my bills instead of having 2 jobs. So that was great. And then the sad part about it is I got this job and my stepmother and stepsister started working there as well. So they made my life miserable at work. I mean, if my dad and her were having a fight or anything I did, my stepsister was jealous of. So it was something. How a father treats his daughter is huge. It has so much of an impact on her. It's how she sees herself. It's the kind of relationship she gets involved in. What kind of man she looks for. All this is kind of off her relationship with her dad. A girl needs to be able to recognize red flags in a relationship. She needs to be able to recognize certain things to know that, hey, you shouldn't do that. And if her relationship with her father is bad, that makes it more difficult. She'll be willing to accept things. A girl needs to know her value, not just take whatever the guy dishes out. If my father didn't love me, then who else will? It's kind of that mentality. She needs to know that she's loved and that she has value so that she won't settle for just anything. And I'm not saying spoil your daughter. We don't need a bunch of princess syndrome people going around, but where she feels she's entitled to things. But, just somebody who's normal and not wanting to accept abuse. Also, through, that age and now, I've had to overcome a lot of feelings of being worthless, self-hate. I've had to learn, and this in recent years, I heard someone say the devil does not attack that which is worthless. I've been living with a lot of attacks from the time I was born, so, that's saying something. So we're perfectly and wonderfully made for God's purpose, and He didn't make a mistake. But the devil, he wants to derail us and detract us from seeing ourselves the way God wants us to see ourselves. We have value. That's not to say to be vain, but we have value. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thanks for joining me. And next week, I'm going to start the next chapter. It'll be chapter 4. I'm actually going to combine chapter 4 and 5 into one because they're really short. It's going to be talking about my safe place and the people that God put in my life to redirect me and protect me. And so, just join me for that and have a good week.